She invited me to dinner to get to know me properly and suggested I wear something appropriate. 7 minutes after the main course, my phone lit up with a lawsuit her family once begged a ghost lawyer to fix. When I said, "I am that lawyer," her wine glass stopped shaking, and everything she thought she knew about me shattered. My name is Mara Whitfield. I'm 32 years old, and I am, by trade, a forensic accountant. It's a job title that sounds stuffy until you realize my primary function is to find the story a person tried to bury in a mountain of numbers. I find the lie, I find the weapon, and I find the money. I work for North Star Forensics, a firm so small it's basically just three of us, a perpetually stressed intern, and a very good coffee machine in a shared office space near South Station. I live in Somerville, in a third-floor walk-up where the pipes clang in winter and the kitchen is too small for more than one person. I take the Red Line into the city every day. I listen to podcasts about financial theory and try not to make eye contact, just like everyone else. My clothes are simple. I buy for quality and I buy to blend in. Black trousers, silk shells, comfortable flats. I don't own a single piece of clothing with a logo large enough to be read from more than a foot away. This is all by design. I call it profile hiding. I learned a long time ago that when you walk into a room, people scan you for data. They look at your watch, your shoes, the brand of your bag, and they make a calculation. They assign you a value before you've even said hello. I prefer to operate without a pre-assigned value. I want people to look at how I live, what I say, and how I treat them, not the title on a business card I rarely hand out. This is, perhaps, why Julian Pierce and I worked so well. At first, Julian is 34, a robotics engineer at a high-end medical device company. He's brilliant in that quiet, focused way that I find irresistible. He designs robotic arms that can perform microsurgery, limbs that can be controlled by thought. He's kind, he's patient, and he has a laugh that starts in his chest and takes a moment to reach his eyes. But Julian is also a Pierce. He comes from Chestnut Hill, which is Boston code for old money, big houses, and a network of family connections that runs so deep it might as well be part of the city's plumbing. He's a good man, but he is heavily, suffocatingly influenced by his family. I knew this. I saw it in the way his shoulders would tense, just slightly, when his phone would buzz with a text from Mom. Evelyn Pierce. I hadn't met her, but I knew her. She was the executive director of the Pierce Atelier, a vaguely defined organization that seemed to be part image consulting firm for Boston's elite and part charitable foundation. Its primary mission, as far as I could tell from its glossy website, was ensuring that the right people attended the right galas in the right clothes. Evelyn Pierce, Julian had explained with an affectionate, apologetic sigh, believed that appearance was value. How you presented yourself to the world was, in her eyes, the only metric that mattered. The invitation came, as I should have expected, via a text from Julian that was clearly dictated by his mother. "Hey," it read, "Mom would love to have you over for a proper family dinner on Friday. Just something intimate at the house. She said to tell you," and this is a direct quote, "Don't be too fussy, darling. Just wear something appropriate." I read the text 3 times. Appropriate. A word that does so much heavy lifting. It's a velvet glove hiding an ironclad set of rules. It implies a standard exists, and that I, by default, am probably on the wrong side of it. I should have felt insulted. I should have felt angry. Instead, I felt a familiar, cold sense of curiosity. I looked around my small living room, at my second-hand armchair, and my shelves overflowing with books on economic history and contract law. I thought about my simple, unbranded clothes hanging neatly in my closet. I accepted the invitation. I accepted it as a silent experiment. I've spent my entire career being underestimated by men and women in expensive suits who thought my boutique firm and my quiet demeanor meant I was harmless. Evelyn Pierce was just another one. As my thumb hovered over the reply button, my phone buzzed again. A different notification. This one from my encrypted work email. It was a court alert. Just a procedural update on a sealed case. But seeing the file name sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. the same jolt I'd felt almost a year ago. It's a part of my life I never, ever talk about. About 10 months ago, North Star Forensics got a panic call. A major coastal resort conglomerate in Maine was on the verge of catastrophic collapse. Their credit lines were being called in. Their vendors were threatening to walk. And a savior investment firm had swooped in with a contract full of predatory, suffocating terms. We were hired as the ghosts, the anonymous consultants brought in to find a way out, and to do it before the summer tourist season. Their only source of revenue was lost. I had 72 hours, for 3 days. I lived on black coffee and the fluorescent hum of my office. I slept for maybe 4 hours, fully clothed on the office sofa. I waded through thousands of pages of contracts, loan agreements, and internal emails. The investment firm was sloppy. They were arrogant. They assumed no one would read the fine print. They had based their right to accelerate the debt on financial projections, not on actual material breach. I found the error. I found the leverage. I drafted the entire forensic brief, outlining a clear pattern of bad faith negotiation, and coordinated with the legal team to file for a temporary restraining order. The other side, the savior firm, was so confident. They barely glanced at our filing. They saw North Star Forensics and scoffed. They underestimated the small firm, the quiet accountant. The restraining order was granted at the 11th hour. The judge's order effectively paused the seizure. I then personally led the renegotiation, stripping the predatory clauses from the contract, extending the payment terms, and securing the company's survival. I saved an entire coastal community's seasonal economy from my shared office in Boston. And no one knew. The non-disclosure agreement I signed was thicker than my wrist. My work was buried under so many layers of attorney-client privilege it was practically subterranean. And to be safe, because the world of New England finance is smaller than you think. I signed all my briefing notes and correspondence using my mother's maiden name, Dawes. The name on that old, sealed file that had just popped up on my phone? Pierce Harbor Resorts. The irony had not been lost on me when I first started dating Julian. Pierce. It was a common enough name, but a few quiet. After-hours database searches confirmed it. Pierce Harbor Resorts was a legacy holding of the Pierce Family Trust. Evelyn Pierce's name was on the charter. Julian's father, Charles, was on the board. My boyfriend's family, the family that was now inviting me to dinner and judging my appropriateness, I had, in complete anonymity, saved their entire coastal portfolio. I had saved them millions, possibly tens of millions, of dollars, and they had no idea. Julian knew nothing. He knew his family had some business in Maine, but the details were boring to him. He was a man of science, not ledgers. He had no idea that the ghost lawyer, as the other side had bitterly referred to me, was the woman he was bringing home to meet his mother. This is the central truth I've built my life on. Your value is not something other people get to grant you. It's not a license they approve. It's something you build, in the dark, in the quiet, through your work. My value was in the precision of my spreadsheets, in the clarity of my reports, in the lives I'd protected by finding the lie in the numbers. I looked down at my desk. Next to my keyboard, in a simple ceramic cup, was the pen my mother gave me when I passed my CPA exam. It's a heavy silver pen, beautifully balanced. Engraved on the side, in her elegant script, are 4 words: do right, fear nothing. It is my talisman, my armor. Evelyn Pierce wanted to see if I was appropriate. She wanted to measure me. I smiled. The experiment was on. I picked up my phone. The court notification for Pierce Harbor Resorts Vise. North Coast Holdings was still glowing on the screen. I swiped it away. Then I replied to Julian. I would be delighted. Please thank your mother for the invitation. What time should I be there? Chestnut Hill is a museum of curated stillness. I come from Laramie, Wyoming. It is a place that smells of high plains dust, pine, and engine grease. My father, Tom Whitfield, spent 40 years of his life with his hands buried deep in the guts of combines, tractors, and pickup trucks. He was a farm mechanic, a man of few words who believed that anything broken could be fixed. provided you had the patience to find the precise point of failure. My mother, Alice, was the school librarian. She was the opposite. All words. She taught me that stories, contracts, and even corporate ledgers are just maps of human intention. Our world was built on a single, unshakable foundation. My mother said it constantly, usually while wiping flour off her hands or stamping books. Respect, Mara, isn't something you can buy. It's something you earn. You build it. My father's version was simpler. He'd just tap a rebuilt engine block with a wrench and say, "Works, doesn't it?" The proof was in the function, not the paint job. This lesson was hardened in me at school. I was the girl in secondhand clothes, not vintage, not thrift store chic, just old. My jeans were patched where I'd worn through the knees, and my sweaters were pilled. I remember one girl, Ashley something, pointing at my scuffed brown boots during recess in the 6th grade and asking if they were Depression era. The laughter that followed was sharp and sudden. I didn't cry. I didn't say anything. I just stood there and felt the cold Wyoming wind cut straight through my thin jacket, and I made a promise to myself. I wasn't going to get rich so I could wear her clothes. I was going to get so smart, so capable, and so essential that one day I would walk into a room and people like her, people who measure the world in logos and price tags, would be forced to listen to me. I wouldn't need to raise my voice. My presence, my knowledge, would be the only credentials that mattered. So I worked. I buried myself in my mother's library, reading not novels, but textbooks I'd ordered on interlibrary loan. I learned accounting principles while my classmates were at football games. I got out. I earned a full academic scholarship to Northeastern University in Boston. The transition was a culture shock. I'd gone from a high school graduating class of 62 kids to a freshman lecture hall of 300, but the rules of work were the same. Find the flaw. Do the work. I majored in finance, graduated summa cum laude, and went straight for my certified public accountant license. But traditional accounting bored me. It was static. It was just recording what had happened. I wanted to know why it had happened and who had lied about it. I specialized. I moved into forensic accounting, focusing on complex contract fraud. My mother was right. A contract is just a map of intention, and I got very, very good at finding the place where the map was deliberately misdrawn. I love the dryness of the text. I love that a multi-million-dollar fraud case can pivot on the definition of the word reasonable or the placement of a single comma. To me, those aren't boring details. They are weapons. They are the shields you use to protect the people who were counting on that money, the employees, the small vendors, the retirees. My philosophy is simple. Every decimal point is someone's rent. Every rounding error is someone's grocery bill. It is all real money. This is why I live the way I do. My life in Somerville, my MBTA pass, my simple wardrobe, this isn't deprivation, it's freedom. I can afford the expensive car, the condo in Back Bay, the logo-heavy bags Evelyn Pierce prizes. I choose not to. I choose to live in a way that allows me to walk away from any job, any client, any situation that demands I compromise my integrity. My profile hiding is a firewall. It keeps my needs small so my principles can be large. It is the ultimate luxury, the luxury of not needing to impress anyone. I met Julian at a cafe near Kendall Square, the epicenter of Boston's tech and biotech boom. I was there on a Saturday afternoon, reviewing a software licensing agreement for a client. He was sitting at the next table, laptop open, trying to debug a line of code. The cafe's Wi-Fi suddenly died, and we both groaned in unison. We started talking. We didn't talk about work, not really. We talked about a biography of Thelonious Monk I was reading. He talked about his passion for assistive technology, how his robotics could one day help people with degenerative nerve disorders. He was gentle, brilliant, and most importantly, he was present. In those first few months, we talked about everything: books, jazz, ethics and artificial intelligence, the best place for ramen in Porter Square. He knew I was an accountant. I told him I worked for a small firm that specialized in complex audits. It was the truth, just not the whole truth. I never mentioned the forensic part. I never talked about the high-stakes negotiations, the emergency filings, the corporate rescues. I avoided mentioning my achievements, not because I was ashamed, but as a test. And he passed. He never pushed. He never asked what I earned, or who my clients were, or what tier my firm was. He just seemed to enjoy my company, my mind. That lack of prying was what made me trust him. He seemed, unlike so many others, to be looking at me, not my resume. The only shadow in those first 6 months was his family. I felt Evelyn Pierce's presence long before I got her appropriate invitation. I felt her in the way Julian's spine would straighten, just slightly, when his phone buzzed. That almost imperceptible tension in his shoulders when the mom icon flashed on his screen. He loved her, but he was also managed by her. He'd talk about her, always with that loving, frustrated sigh. "Mom's organizing the gala again," he'd say. "She's vetting the guest list," he told me, trying to make it a joke, that his mother preferred girls who were photogenic. "She likes women who are ready for the gala frame," he'd explained. I laughed and said, "Bad news for her. I'm the person who blinks in every single photo." He laughed too, but it was thin. "She's just from another generation. Mara. She believes in presentation. But she'll love you. Really. She will. Once she knows you." But that was the crux of the problem, wasn't it? Once she knows you, Evelyn Pierce wasn't interested in knowing me. She was interested in viewing me. She was interested in my appropriateness. The invitation to dinner wasn't an opening. It was a test, a costume fitting. She wanted to see if I, the girl from Somerville with the simple clothes and the Wyoming roots, could be polished and molded into something that fit the Pierce family frame. I thought back to that girl on the playground in Laramie. I thought about the cold wind and the biting laughter. I was 32 now. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone, but if I was going to be judged by my cover, then I would make damn sure they saw the substance. I wouldn't just be in the room. I would be the most dangerous person in it, and they would never, ever see me coming. The call about Pierce Harbor Resorts came in at 6:15 p.m. on a Tuesday. 10 months ago, my boss, David, took it on speaker. His face already grim. We were a firefight firm. Nobody calls North Star Forensics when things are going well. They call us when the building is already engulfed in flames. This was a 5-alarm fire. The client was a law firm in Portland, Maine, representing a holding company called Pierce Harbor Resorts. The conglomerate owned 3 high-end resorts and several marinas in and around Camden. They were the lifeblood of the local economy, and they were about to be seized. The story was classic corporate predation. The resorts had a complex credit line with a major bank, which they had serviced without issue for a decade, but after a mild winter and a soft booking forecast for spring, a secondary lender, a vulture capital firm called North Coast Holdings, had bought up a key piece of their debt. North Coast had then immediately, and aggressively, issued a notice of default, triggering a cross-default on their primary bank loans. The entire operation was set to be either liquidated or handed over to North Coast within days. The timing was the knife in the back. This was happening in late April. If they lost control of the properties before Memorial Day, the entire summer tourist season, their entire annual revenue, would be gone. The company would vaporize, and hundreds of local jobs would go with it. We were hired to find a miracle. The Portland lawyer was blunt. "We need a reason to stop the clock. Anything. We go to court in less than 3 days to argue against the seizure. Right now, we have nothing." I said, "Send me every contract, every loan agreement, every amendment, every email chain, and every notice of default, and I mean everything." For the next 72 hours, my world shrank to the glowing rectangle of my monitor. The conference room became my home. I lived on stale coffee, vending machine pretzels, and the hum of the server. Julian and I had been dating for about 2 months at this point. I remember sending him a single text. "Work emergency, going dark for a few days." He'd sent back, "Be safe, bring dragons to justice." I hadn't had the energy to smile. The paperwork was a mountain, deliberately confusing. North Coast Holdings had buried the kill switch deep. Their lawyers were good. The default notices were technically sound, the language precise. On day 1, I found nothing. On day 2, I felt a rising tide of panic. The lawyers were calling David every 3 hours. "Anything yet, Ms. Whitfield?" they'd ask, their voices tight. "I'm still reading," I'd reply, my voice flat. The breakthrough came at 2 a.m. on the 3rd day. My eyes were burning, and the numbers had started to swim. I was cross-referencing the primary loan agreement with the new terms North Coast had imposed, and I found it. It was one sentence, buried in a 40-page addendum. It stated that any notice of default must be based on material evidence of financial instability. I went back to the default notice North Coast had sent. It was aggressive, full of threats. It cited the company's projected revenue shortfall for the coming quarter, based on the soft spring bookings. Projected. I stood up from the table so fast my chair fell over. "David!" I yelled. He was asleep on the office sofa. "David, get the Portland lawyers on the phone. Now!" I had him. The predatory firm had moved too fast. They had issued a notice of default, an act that was, in itself, a financial weapon, based on a forecast. They were claiming the company was insolvent based on something that might happen, not something that had happened. They had no material evidence of a current breach, only a prediction. It wasn't a violation. It was a weather report. "They bluffed," I told the lead attorney, pacing the conference room. "They're trying to seize a billion-dollar company based on a guess. It's not a breach. It's a procedural error, a fatal one." I told them exactly what to do. "We are not arguing against the seizure. We are arguing that the notice itself is invalid. We need to file for a preliminary injunction and a temporary restraining order, immediately, within 48 hours. There was a heavy silence on the phone. Then, "Who is this? Is she a lawyer?" David cut in. "She's the one who just saved your company. Do what she says." This is the part of my job I love, the arrogance of the opponent. The lawyers for North Coast Holdings were from a massive white shoe firm in Boston. When they received our emergency filing, I know exactly what they did. They saw North Star Forensics and the attached forensic brief signed by M. Dawes, my mother's name, my professional ghost, and they laughed. A P.I. Trou based on a procedural technicality from a no-name accounting shop? They didn't even take it seriously. They sent a junior associate to the hearing. I didn't go. My job was done in the shadows. But I had done more than just find the error. I had spent the last 12 hours building a supporting narrative. I created a precise timeline of the money. I pulled every internal email from North Coast Holdings that we'd gotten in discovery, showing their executives discussing the opportunity presented by the soft spring. I demonstrated a clear, undeniable pattern of bad faith negotiating. I painted a picture not of a simple error, but of a deliberate, predatory attack. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in the Maine Superior Court, read my brief. She read the email timeline. She saw the projections versus the material facts. The restraining order was granted at 4:57 p.m. Just 3 minutes before the court closed. The seizure was stopped, frozen in its tracks. The junior associate from the Boston firm reportedly went white. But we weren't done. The TRO just paused the fight. Now, I had them. I told our legal team, "Set a meeting. We're renegotiating." The next week, I sat in our conference room in Boston, connected via a secure video line to a room full of furious, expensive lawyers. They now knew who M. Dawes was, or at least, they knew what she was capable of. The laughter was gone. I led the negotiation. I didn't raise my voice. I simply presented the facts. Your default notice was invalid. Your actions constitute bad faith, and we have the documentation to prove it. If we take this to a full trial, you will not only lose, but you will be exposed to significant punitive damages. I told them what we wanted. The predatory clauses in their contract were to be removed, all of them. The exclusivity agreements that were strangling the resort's vendor relationships were to be voided, and the payment terms on the original, non-predatory debt were to be extended by 24 months, giving the resorts 2 full summer seasons to recover. They fought, they postured, they threatened. I just sat there, my silver pen in my hand, and waited. When they were finished, I'd just say, "The alternative is a public trial, your choice." It took 8 hours. They agreed to every single term. I saved Pierce Harbor Resorts. I saved their summer season, their company, and the jobs of an entire town, all from a shared office in Somerville, using a name that wasn't mine. A week later, a formal thank you letter arrived at the office, addressed to North Star Forensics, ATN M. Dawes. It was on thick, creamy cardstock, embossed with the name of the Portland law firm. It was a brief, almost cold, note of gratitude for services rendered, with a final line. The ownership family expresses its profound appreciation for the discreet and effective resolution of this matter. The ownership family. I remember staring at that phrase. It was so impersonal, so removed, as if they were thanking a plumber for fixing a leak in the guest cottage. They had no idea who I was. They didn't know I was a 32-year-old woman. They didn't know I wore secondhand boots or lived in a third-floor walk-up. I was just Dawes, a ghost in their machine. I printed the letter, filed it with the closing documents, and moved the entire case file into our internal archives. Case closed. It was just a job. But the name, Pierce Harbor Resorts. When I confirmed, through public records, that the ownership family was, in fact, the same Pierce family that Julian belonged to, my blood ran cold for a second. The NDA I'd signed was a fortress. It prevented me from ever mentioning this to anyone. But even if it hadn't, my own code would have, my work is my work, my life is my life. Using that kind of information would be a violation of everything I'd built. It would be using my father's wrench to break something, not fix it. So I built the wall. I never mentioned it. I never hinted at it. Julian's family was just his family, and M. Dawes was just a ghost. The wall between my work and my life with Julian was, for the most part, a welcome one. My life as Mara Whitfield, girlfriend, was spent in the sun. We fell into a comfortable, easy rhythm that autumn. We'd spend Saturdays biking along the Charles River, the air sharp with the smell of damp leaves and river water. We'd go from Cambridgeport all the way to Watertown and back, our legs burning, our conversation flowing as easily as the water beside us. Our evenings were quiet. My Somerville kitchen was barely large enough for me, let alone a 6'2" robotics engineer, but we made it work. We'd cook simple dinners, pasta with fresh vegetables from the Haymarket, or lentil soup that we'd let simmer for hours. We'd argue over jazz, me defending Thelonious Monk's discordant genius, him insisting on the smoother lines of Dave Brubeck. It was good. It was real. But the wall was always there, and its shadow was cast by his family. The pressure on him was immense, a quiet, constant weight I could see in the set of his shoulders. One night, we were sharing a bottle of wine on my tiny fire escape, looking out over the Somerville rooftops. He had been quiet all evening. "She called today," he said finally, staring at a cluster of stars barely visible through the Boston city glow. "Your mom?" He nodded, taking a drink. "She was asking about you, again." "What kind of questions?" I asked, keeping my voice light. He let out a short, bitter laugh. "The usual. Where you went to school. She was relieved Northeastern is respectable. Where you grew up. What your parents do. I think she was running my answers through some kind of internal algorithm to see if you'd fit." He turned to me, his eyes serious. "Mara, you have to understand. My entire life, the number one rule in our house wasn't be good or be kind. It was, don't embarrass the family. That's the Pierce family motto. It means everything. What you wear, who you date, what you study. It's all just data for her to manage, to make sure the brand is protected." He told me about the girlfriends who had come before me. There was a girl from a banking family, whom Evelyn had adored until she wore the wrong designer to a charity event. There was a brilliant Ph.D. candidate from MIT, whom Evelyn had dismissed as unpolished because she didn't wear makeup and preferred sneakers. My mother, Julian said, rubbing the back of his neck, has a checklist: clothes, family connections, schools. She's assessing your photogenic quality. Photogenic? That's her word, he sighed. She likes people who are photogenic more than people who are genuine. One is useful for the gala program. The other is just messy. I thought about that for a long time. Photogenic. Something polished, perfect, and two-dimensional. Something that could be framed. I thought about my father's grease-stained hands and my mother's worn-out library books. We were not photogenic. I looked at Julian. Genuine is hard to photograph, I said quietly, but it doesn't fade. He put his arm around me and pulled me close. That's why I like you, Whitfield. You're the least faded person I know. But his words put another brick in the wall I was already maintaining. The non-disclosure agreement I'd signed for the Pierce Harbor Resorts case was an ironclad fortress. I could never tell him. I could never say, "Your family's photogenic world? I'm the one who saved it. I'm the ghost who rebuilt the foundation while your mother was busy worrying about the paint." The secret was isolating. I was falling for a man I couldn't be fully honest with. Not because I was lying, but because my truth was a weapon I was legally and morally bound not to use. I was M. Dawes, and I was Mara Whitfield, and I was terrified of the day those two women might be forced into the same room. That day was fast approaching. A week before the appropriate dinner invitation, I was at my desk. It was almost 9 p.m., and the office was quiet. I was running a final review on a different case, a small construction firm being squeezed by a supplier. My phone, muted on the desk, lit up. It was an automated alert from the federal court database, a system I subscribed to for updates on all my closed cases. The subject line was just a docket number, but I knew it by heart. Case Nome 124 CV 0915. Pierce Harbor Resorts, v. North Coast Holdings. I tapped the screen. The update was nothing. A notice of filing for a minor procedural motion. The case was effectively over. The settlement I'd negotiated was holding, but the lawyers still generated paperwork. It was a faint, digital echo of the biggest fight of my career. I looked at the name, Pierce Harbor Resorts, glowing on my phone screen. Julian's family, the family I was going to meet, the family whose matriarch was already judging my appropriateness. I felt a cold spike of something, not anger, but a kind of weary irony. I held my thumb over the screen. I could forward this. I could print it. I could keep it as a little piece of armor in my pocket. No, that wasn't my way. My mother's voice. Do right. Fear nothing. Using this, even as a secret, would be an act of fear. It would mean I needed it. I deleted the notification. I chose silence. My work was done. M. Dawes was back in the archive. Then, 2 days later, Julian's text arrived. Mom would love to have you over for a proper family dinner on Friday. Just something intimate at the house. She said to tell you, and this is a direct quote, "Don't be too fussy, darling. Just wear something appropriate." I read it, and I understood completely. This was not a dinner. This was an audit, and I was the balance sheet she was about to inspect. My silent experiment, as I dubbed it, began right then. On Friday evening, I left my office at 5:30. I took the red line home to Somerville. I showered, and I stood in front of my small closet. I had one black dress that was expensive, designer, and universally appropriate. I had worn it to a single North Star holiday party. I left it on the hanger. Instead, I pulled out a simple, sleeveless dress made of heavy beige linen. It had a clean neckline and ended just below my knees. It was well made, but it was not a brand. It was not photogenic. It was just a dress. Then, my shoes. I had heels. I hated them. I picked up my favorite pair of dark brown leather flats. They were worn, The toes were scuffed. The soles were thin, molded perfectly to my feet. They were the most comfortable shoes I owned. They were the shoes of a person who walks. I did not wear a watch. My only jewelry was a pair of tiny, simple gold stud earrings. I was not dressing in defiance. I was dressing as myself. I was providing a clean, unadulterated baseline for Evelyn's audit. Let her see the real data. For a gift, I walked 2 blocks to my neighborhood bakery, the one that smells of yeast and burnt sugar. I didn't buy wine. I didn't know their tastes, and I refused to be judged on my choice of label. I bought a large, crusty loaf of fresh sourdough, still warm. The baker wrapped it in brown paper and tied it with twine. I went back to my apartment and took out a small, thick card of personal stationery, the color of cream. With my mother's silver pen, I wrote a note. Mrs. Pierce, thank you so much for having me in your home. I've heard so much about your dinners. I hope you enjoy this. It's the best bread in Somerville. Warmly, Mara. It was genuine. It was not messy. I took a rideshare to Chestnut Hill. The car wound its way through the broad, darkening streets, past houses that weren't houses, but estates. They sat far back from the road, separated from the world by acres of perfect, irrigated lawn and ancient stone walls. It was a different country. The car pulled up to a set of imposing black iron gates. A camera glowed red. The car's driver spoke my name into an intercom. The gate swung open silently. We drove up a long, curving driveway lined with lamps that cast a soft, golden light. The house was enormous, a brick Georgian mansion that seemed to absorb the twilight. It was beautiful, and it was perfect, and it was utterly intimidating. I paid the driver, took my paper-wrapped bread, and walked to the front door. It was massive, black, and glossier than a car. I stood there for a moment. I could feel the cold of the stone step through my worn flats. I adjusted the simple linen dress. I was not Mara Whitfield, the girlfriend. I was not M. Dawes, the ghost lawyer. I was the auditor, and I was here to observe. I reached up and pressed the bell. The door did not open. It swung inward, a heavy, soundless panel of wood receding into the cavernous space beyond. Julian was there, his smile so tight I could see the tension in his jaw. He was wearing a dark blazer over a crisp white shirt, no tie. He was dressed for an appraisal, in his own home. "Mara," he said, his voice a little too high. "You're here. Come in, come in." He reached for my hand, but his eyes flicked past me, to the car disappearing down the long, lamp-lit driveway. And then, Evelyn Pierce emerged from the shadows of a 2-story foyer. She was exactly as I had imagined, which was, in itself, a small disappointment. She was tall, with a disciplined thinness that spoke of expensive trainers and relentless control. Her hair was a helmet of perfect, silver blonde, not a single strand daring to move. She wore a silk sheath dress in a pale, unnameable color, something between beige and champagne. Her smile was a thin, precise line, a masterpiece of social geometry. "Mara," she said. Her voice was low and smooth, like polished marble. It was a voice that never had to be raised, a voice accustomed to instant obedience. "We are so very pleased you could join us. Julian has told us things about you." Her eyes, a pale, assessing blue, performed the scan. It was as swift and impersonal as a barcode reader. My hair, simple, clean. My face, minimal makeup. My linen dress, unbranded, wrinkled from the car ride. The scan faltered for a fraction of a second, registering data that did not compute. Then, it locked onto the 2 key pieces of evidence. First, the brown paper bag in my hand. Second, the simple, worn, leather-strap watch on my wrist. It was my father's watch, the one he gave me when I graduated from college. Its financial value was negligible. Its sentimental value was my entire foundation. I saw the calculation in her gaze: linen, worn leather, paper bag, no visible labels. The result came back: insufficient. Downgrade. "Mrs. Pierce," I said. my voice steady. It's a pleasure to meet you. This is for you. I held out the brown paper bag. It's from a small bakery in my neighborhood, a sourdough. It's still warm. She did not reach for it. She looked at the paper bag as if I had just handed her a live animal. Julian, seeing the hesitation, jumped forward. Oh, bread. That's great. Mara, I love that place. Mom, it's fantastic. Evelyn's smile tightened. She placed a cool, dry hand over mine, but it was a gesture of deflection, not acceptance, guiding my hand toward Julian. How rustic, she said. Thank you, dear. Julian, please have Maria take this. Perhaps she can find a place for it. She then placed that same cool hand on my forearm, her nails perfectly manicured. Let's get you a drink. You must be parched. She guided me inside. The house was not a home. It was a museum of wealth, a testament to standardization. The colors were gold, cream, and a deep, joyless maroon. The art on the walls was massive, abstract, and perfectly matched to the upholstery. There was not a single book out of place, not a photograph that wasn't professionally lit and framed. The air was still and cool, and smelled faintly of lemon oil and, I imagined, interest payments. We were led into a dining room that could have seated 30. Tonight, it was set for 4, at one end of a dark, polished table that reflected the chandelier like a black lake. It felt less like an intimate dinner and more like a corporate negotiation. Gold-rimmed plates sat on gold chargers. There were 3 forks and 4 glasses for each of us. Charles Pierce, Julian's father, rose from his seat. He was a softer, older version of Julian, with a full head of white hair and a much warmer smile. But his eyes were the same as his wife's, assessing. Mara, he said, shaking my hand. His grip was firm, dry. A pleasure. Julian tells us you're an accountant. A forensic accountant, I corrected gently. It's very nice to meet you, Mr. Pierce. Charles, please. The pre-dinner conversation was a performance. Evelyn and Charles narrated their recent attendance at a hospital gala. They didn't tell a story. They listed names. The chair of the board, a state senator, a prominent surgeon. It was a verbal press release, designed to establish their credentials, their importance, their place in the world. Julian was quiet. He sipped his wine and nodded, his role apparently to be the silent, well-dressed son. When a woman I hadn't seen, also named Maria, served the first course, Evelyn turned her smile on me. It was like a spotlight. This must all be so different from your world. Dear, she said, Julian mentioned you come from Wyoming? She said it as if it were a hypothetical, distant planet. It is different, yes, I said, taking a sip of water. The sky is bigger in Wyoming, and the houses are farther apart. Evelyn produced a small, brittle laugh. I'm sure. And your dress, it's so brave. There it was, the first, carefully aimed dart. Brave? I asked, my voice polite. Oh, of course, she said, waving a hand adorned with a diamond the size of a postage stamp. To choose such minimalism in this day and age, with so many lovely options available, to go so simple, it's a real statement. It's very courageous. Courageous, the word for someone who defied convention, or for someone who simply didn't know the rules. I just find it comfortable, I said, holding her gaze. Julian shifted in his chair. Mom, it's a very nice dress. Of course it is, darling, she said, not looking at him. It's just simple. Charles leaned forward, steepling his fingers. This was the friendly dad part of the interrogation. So, forensic accounting, North Star, Julian said. Not a firm I'm familiar with. Is it a large operation? No, I said, meeting his gaze. We're small, deliberately. It keeps us agile. Ah. He nodded, as if I had just confirmed a suspicion. A boutique firm, that's difficult, isn't it? The endless paperwork, the numbers. I imagine the workflow is unpredictable. The income rather Precarious? He wanted me to be small. He wanted me to be precarious. He wanted me to be a girl in a simple linen dress, struggling. I placed my fork down, next to the gold-rimmed plate. We do well. I'm more interested in the work than the size of the office. We measure our success by our impact, not by our glamour. Impact, Charles repeated, tasting the word. He smiled. A noble sentiment, but sentiment doesn't pay the mortgage, as they say. Evelyn cut in, her voice all silk and manufactured sympathy. Charles, be nice. Mara is Julian's guest, and she's right. But, Mara, you must understand, as you and Julian become closer, appearances do begin to matter. She looked at Julian, a look that was both fond and controlling. Then she looked at me. You are, by extension, a reflection of him, and he, a reflection of this family. The world is built on these small, visual cues. Julian put his wineglass down with a heavy thud on the tablecloth. Mom, what are you doing? I am merely having a conversation, darling, she said. She turned her full, radiant, condescending attention back to me, ignoring her son completely. We know it's difficult. You're a young woman, starting out, living in Somerville. She said Somerville, as if it were a refugee camp. We know the cost of living in Boston is astronomical, and we would hate for you to feel stressed, trying to keep up. I could see it coming. It was so transparent, so beautifully, horribly insulting. It was almost a work of art. Julian's father and I, she went on, placing her hand over Charles's, have always believed in supporting our children's partners. We want you to feel welcome. We'd like to offer you a small stipend, a little assistance, to help you with your wardrobe, to make you feel more comfortable at the events you'll be attending with Julian. She paused, for effect. Say, $600 a month? Just a little something, deposited discreetly, of course, to help you acquire pieces that are appropriate. Silence. $600, an allowance, to buy appropriate clothes. They weren't just auditing me, they were trying to put me on their payroll. I looked at Julian. His face was a mask of pale, horrified embarrassment. He was frozen. He was the boy who couldn't embarrass the family, and his mother had just turned his girlfriend into a charity case in front of him. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. I turned back to Evelyn. I even smiled, just slightly. Evelyn, I said, my voice quiet, but so clear it cut through the room. That is an incredibly generous offer, but I am not an employee, and I am not a child. I am perfectly capable of dressing myself. I set my boundary. One sentence. No anger, no defensiveness, just a fact. The air in the room didn't just get cold. It froze. The temperature dropped 10 degrees. Evelyn's smile became brittle. It was a porcelain mask, and I had just put a hairline crack in it. She was not used to being told no. Well, she said, her voice a little higher, losing its marble smoothness. I was only trying to help. Of course, I said, picking up my water glass. She composed herself. The mask was back in place. It was time for the next tactic, the comparison. You'll have to forgive my bluntness, she said, dabbing her perfect lips with a linen napkin. I am just so used to a certain standard. Julian's last serious girlfriend, you know, the one before his MIT phase. She was a wonderful girl, a lawyer, Stanford, I believe, or perhaps Yale. Either way, she was so refined. She understood quality. She knew that presentation is a sign of respect, for oneself and for others. She was painting the portrait of the perfect daughter-in-law, the one I was being measured against and failing to match. I looked up from my plate. I was done. I was done with the test, done with the game, done with her standard. Evelyn, I said, my voice still quiet, still calm. I appreciate that, but I didn't learn my manners in a showroom. I learned them in a courtroom. She blinked. I beg your pardon? In my line of work, I said, speaking slowly, clearly. Refined doesn't win cases. Refined is just a distraction. I learned very quickly that you don't judge a person's capability by the price of their suit. You judge it by the quality of their argument. I'm sure you understand. The duel was over. I had just drawn my weapon, and it was sharper than her condescension. Charles cleared his throat. He looked at his wife, then at me. For the first time, I saw a flicker of something. Not respect, perhaps, but reevaluation. He was a businessman. He understood transactions, and the transaction in this room had just changed. The silence that followed was absolute. It was so quiet. I could hear the loud, heavy thud, thud, thud of the massive grandfather clock ticking in the foyer. It was the only sound in the entire cavernous house. It sounded like a judge's gavel. Julian was staring at me, his mouth slightly open. He looked stunned. And then, on the table, a vibration. My phone. I had placed it face down, on silent mode, but the vibration was strong enough to buzz against the antique wood. "Oh, I'm so sorry," I said, reaching for it. "I thought I had turned that off." I picked it up. The screen lit up with a banner notification, an automated email alert. Julian, sitting next to me, glanced at it. Evelyn, across from me, saw the screen light up. The text on the banner was bright, white, and unmistakable. Case update. Pierce Harbor Resorts, v. North Coast Holdings, order update. The grandfather clock in the foyer, which had been a dull, ambient thud, suddenly sounded like a hammer striking stone. Julian's eyes were wide. He had seen the name. He didn't understand the context, but he recognized his family's corporate entity. He looked from the phone screen to my face, his embarrassment from the last 10 minutes being replaced by a sharp, sudden confusion. Charles Pierce looked curious, his head tilted. He was a businessman. A name was a name, but the timing was interesting. Evelyn, however, was perfectly still. Her pale blue eyes were fixed on the glowing rectangle in my hand. Her pupils, which had been small and assessing, contracted. It was a microscopic, involuntary reaction, but I saw it. It was the physical shock of recognition. The name Pierce Harbor Resorts, in the same room as the linen-clad girl from Somerville, was an anomaly, a piece of data that her entire operating system was struggling to process. I did not snatch the phone away. I calmly pressed the side button, plunging the screen into darkness. I placed the phone, face down, on the polished wood. "I do apologize," I said, my voice quiet but clear in the silent room. "I thought I had put that on vibrate. Court updates never sleep." My words hung in the air. The spell was broken for a moment. Maria, the housekeeper, reappeared from a shadow, her movements silent, to clear the first-course plates. The light scrape of porcelain against the gold chargers felt impossibly loud. Julian cleared his throat, a dry, nervous sound. "So, Dad, I was meaning to ask you about the Pierce Harbor Resorts." Evelyn's voice cut through his attempted diversion. It was not loud. It was soft, almost conversational, but it had the density of a collapsing star. Julian stopped talking. Charles turned his head to look at his wife. Evelyn was looking only at me. Her poise was a fortress. The mask of the hostess perfectly reapplied, but her eyes were different. They were no longer assessing. They were hunting. "That's the name that was on your screen, was it not?" she asked, her voice impossibly light. "Pierce Harbor Resorts, Vi. North Coast Holdings." She had repeated the case name perfectly. What an extraordinary coincidence. This was the test. This was the interrogation moving to its next phase. She was not asking a question. She was probing a weakness. Does this girl know something? Is she connected? Or is this just a random, bizarre intersection of worlds? I held her gaze. The dining room was cold again, but this time, the chill was coming from me. "It's not a coincidence, Evelyn," I said. Julian's breath hitched. Charles leaned forward. His voice, unlike his wife's, was not light. It was a low growl. "What does that mean?" young lady. What business do you have with that file?" "Before I answer that," I said, my gaze moving from Charles to Evelyn, "you were just talking about your standard. You were talking about presentation, and Stanford, and being refined." I kept my hands resting lightly on the table, palms down. "You offered me $600 a month to help me meet that standard. I think, before we talk about that court file, it's only fair that I share my standard with you." Julian looked like he was going to be physically ill. "Mara, please," he whispered. "You don't have to do this." "It's all right, Julian," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "It's important. This is a conversation your mother wanted to have." I reached down for the simple canvas tote bag I had placed by my chair. It was, I was sure, another item on her list of my failures. I placed it in my lap. I wasn't looking for a document. Not yet. I was looking for my anchor. My fingers closed around the cool, heavy silver of my mother's pen. I pulled it out and placed it on the table, parallel to my plate. The light from the chandelier glinted off the engraving. "This was a gift," I said, my voice steady, pulling the focus of the room onto that single object. "My standard isn't about money, or addresses, or what school you went to. It's not about being photogenic. My standard is about doing the right thing, with precision and effectiveness, when no one is watching." Evelyn's eyes flicked to the pen, then back to my face. "What a lovely sentiment," she said, her voice dripping ice. "But you are avoiding the question, Mara, the court file." "I'm not avoiding it," I said. "I'm giving you the context." I picked up the pen. I held it in my hand. "Do right. Fear nothing." "About 10 months ago," I began, my voice changing. The social politeness was gone. This was my professional voice, the one I used in boardrooms, the one I used to dismantle arguments and present facts. Pierce Harbor Resorts was facing a catastrophic, hostile takeover by a vulture capital firm called North Coast Holdings. They had bought up a key piece of your secondary debt and triggered a cross-default on your primary bank loans, citing a notice of default. Charles Pierce froze. His wineglass was halfway to his mouth. He set it down, very, very slowly. Evelyn's mask of poise didn't slip, but all the color drained from her face. She was no longer pale. She was white. I continued, my voice measured, reciting the facts I knew better than my own name. The seizure was scheduled. It was timed perfectly to hit just before Memorial Day. That timing would have not only cost your family the company, it would have wiped out the entire summer season, bankrupted your vendors, and destroyed the economy of half a dozen towns in Maine. You had, I believe, less than 72 hours before you lost everything. The room was a vacuum. The only sound was my voice. I was describing, with perfect, cold accuracy, the worst weekend of their financial lives, the weekend they never spoke of, the weekend that was, to them, a sealed tomb of terror and humiliation. Charles was staring at me now. His eyes narrowed to slits. "How?" he said, his voice a low growl. "Do you know this? This information was under the strictest, most severe non-disclosure. Only the board, our primary counsel, and—" He stopped. His eyes widened, just fractionally. "And the consultants," I finished for him. "The ghosts you hired to find a way out. The problem was, your lawyers in Portland were stumped. They were preparing to argue for more time, a motion they would have lost. They were looking at the wrong things. They were looking at the outcome." I tapped my mother's pen on the table once, a sharp click. I looked at the procedure. The default notice North Coast sent you, the weapon they were using to take everything, was based on projected revenue shortfalls. It was a guess, a weather report. It was not, as stipulated in your own loan agreement addendum, based on material evidence of an actual breach. They were sloppy, they were arrogant, and they bluffed. Charles Pierce looked like I had just punched him in the stomach. He was a businessman. He knew, intimately, what I was talking about. Evelyn's hands were in her lap, but I could see her knuckles go white as she gripped the linen napkin. "Our counsel," Charles said, his voice a rough whisper. Our counsel in Portland. They advised us that an emergency injunction was filed. They said they were working with an analyst, a consultant. He trailed off, looking at me, at the linen dress, at the scuffed shoes, at the girl from Somerville. "The lawyer on that filing," he said, his voice thick. "The name on the primary forensic affidavit. It was Dawes, M. Dawes. We were told it was a senior partner, a man." This was the moment, the final piece of the reveal. I looked him directly in the eye. "Dawes is my mother's maiden name," I said. "I don't use it on my personal credit cards. I use it on high-security non-disclosure agreements, and when I am legally required to sign my name to a forensic brief that is about to be filed in federal court." I let the words land. I let them sit in the cold, perfect, silent air between us. "I wasn't the lawyer," I clarified, "because precision is everything. I was the forensic accountant. I was the consultant. I was the one who found the error at 2 o'clock in the morning. I was the one who built the entire forensic timeline, who found the bad faith email chain, and who coordinated with the legal team to file the PITRO. And when the judge granted that order, I was the one on the video call, M. Dawes, who ran the renegotiation that stripped North Coast of their leverage and saved your company." Silence. Absolute, profound, geological silence. The grandfather clock's thud, thud, thud was a heartbeat in a tomb. Julian was completely white. He was looking at me as if he had never seen me before in his life. He was seeing a stranger. I reached back into my tote bag. This time, I pulled out a single, folded piece of paper. It wasn't the original. That was sealed in our archives. It was a redacted public copy of the judge's final order, a simple, one-page document. I unfolded it. At the top, the case name, Pierce Harbor Resorts Vise, North Coast Holdings. At the bottom, a single, beautiful word, granted. I slid the paper across the polished black lake of the table. It stopped in the center, equidistant between Charles and Evelyn. "That," I said, "is my standard. That is my impact, and it doesn't come with a monthly allowance." The duel was over. I looked at Evelyn Pierce. Her mask of perfect, curated poise was gone. It had not just cracked, it had disintegrated. Her face was bare, and it was a mess of shock, disbelief, and a dawning, terrifying humiliation. She reached for her wine glass. Her hand, adorned with the massive diamond, was shaking. It was not a vibration. It was a tremor, a visible, uncontrollable rattling. She wrapped her fingers around the stem of the glass. Her perfectly manicured, pale pink fingernail tapped against the crystal. Click, 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 click. It was the only sound she could make. She gripped the glass, her knuckles white, but the shaking didn't stop. She couldn't raise it. She couldn't speak. She just stared at me, the ghost from Wyoming, the girl who had just rewritten the entire ledger of her life. The silence in the dining room was no longer just a pause. It was a vacuum, pulling all the air, all the sound, all the polite fictions of the last hour into a single, dense point of singularity. Julian was a statue, his face bloodless. Evelyn's hand was still frozen on her wine glass, her knuckles a sharp white ridge of bone. It was Charles who moved first. He was the businessman. He understood loss and gain, leverage and ruin. He slowly, deliberately, reached a hand across the polished table. His fingers, thick and manicured, closed on the single sheet of paper I had slid into the center. He pulled the document closer. His eyes scanned the text. He was not a lawyer, but he was a man who had lived and breathed this document, or at least, the terror it represented. He read it once, fast, for the conclusion. He read it a second time, slower, for the mechanism. I watched his gaze stop, his eyes locking on the phrase, material instability. I could see the numbers running behind his eyes. He was not seeing a legal brief. He was seeing the balance sheet of his life. He was seeing the payroll for 1,000 employees. He was seeing the mortgages on the resorts. He was seeing the yachts in the marinas. the reservations for the summer season, the entire financial edifice of the Pierce family legacy. He was seeing it all resting, for one terrifying, 72-hour period, on the interpretation of that single legal phrase. He was seeing the ghost, the anonymous M. Dawes, who had found the flaw in the weapon, turned it around, and saved him. And he was seeing her now, sitting at his table, in a simple linen dress, having just refused a $600 a month clothing allowance. He lowered the paper. He looked at his wife, whose face was a ruin of its former composure. Then, he looked at me. The assessment in his eyes was gone, replaced by a deep, profound, and utterly unsettling confusion. He had no framework for this. It was Evelyn who finally broke the silence. Her voice, when it came, was not the smooth, polished marble I had heard at the door. It was a dry, brittle whisper, the sound of a reed cracking. "Why?" she asked. She was not looking at Charles. She was looking at me. Why didn't you say anything before? When you met Julian? Why?" The question was not one of finance. It was one of social dynamics. She, a woman who lived her entire life by the unspoken rules of class and presentation, could not understand why I had withheld the ultimate social trump card. I held her gaze. I did not feel triumph. I just felt tired and clear. "2 reasons. Evelyn," I said, my voice quiet, but it filled the entire room. "The first is simple. I was, and am, bound by a non-disclosure agreement. My work is built on discretion. What I did for your company, I did as Dawes. It has no place in my personal life. That is a line I do not cross." I paused, letting the professionalism of that answer settle. "And the second reason," I continued, looking from her to Charles, and finally to Julian. "The second reason is because I wanted to see what you would do. I wanted to see how this family would treat a person you believed had nothing. I wanted to see how you would treat Mara Whitfield, the girl from Wyoming with the simple clothes and the small firm job, who brought you bread in a paper bag. I wanted to see who you really were when you weren't being managed." The truth of the experiment, my silent audit, landed on the table with more force than the court order. "You're not a very nice person, Evelyn," I added, not as an insult, but as a final forensic conclusion. "Not when you think no one of importance is watching." A small, strangled sound came from Julian. He finally unfroze, but he didn't look at me. He turned, in his chair, to face his mother directly. The movement was sharp, decisive. "Mom," he said, and his voice was shaking, not with fear, but with a new, raw anger. I told you she was different. I told you she was important, and you treated her like a project, like something to be fixed." He looked at his father. "Both of you, this entire night, this interrogation." He turned back to Evelyn. "I knew this would happen. I knew it, and I told myself it was just Mom being Mom, but I was quiet. I sat here, and I let you do it." His voice dropped, the anger turning inward. "I was quiet for too long. I was quiet for too long. He had finally, publicly, broken the family rule. He had chosen. I looked at him, and for the first time all night, I felt a sharp, unexpected sting of something. It was complicated. "Julian," I said, my voice softening just a fraction. He turned to me, his eyes full of shame and a desperate plea for understanding. "Silence is a choice, too," I said gently. "It's a decision, and it is, in its own way, a very gentle form of complicity." He didn't flinch. He just nodded, absorbing the truth. He had been complicit in their assessment of me. The focus shifted back to Evelyn. She had been defeated, utterly. Her standard was in ashes. Her son had just publicly rebuked her, and the girl she had tried to bribe with a clothing allowance was, in fact, the person who had underwritten her entire existence for the last 10 months. She lowered her gaze from my face, to the table, to her own trembling hands, When she spoke, her voice was almost inaudible. I owe you an apology. The words were like stones, forced from her throat. An apology, a transaction, an attempt to close this new, gaping deficit. I shook my head. Once. No, I said. You don't owe me an apology. Evelyn, an apology is just another word. It's an attempt to make this moment feel better, to close the ledger. I'm not interested in that. She looked up, confused. If you truly feel that way, I said, don't apologize to me. Just be better. The next time you meet someone who doesn't fit your photogenic standard, the next time you meet a girl from Somerville or Wyoming, just be kind, be decent, pay whatever you think you owe me forward by changing how you behave in the future. I had not accepted her surrender. I had redefined the terms of her defeat. I was giving her work to do. The entire axis of the room had tilted. The values of pedigree, of old money, of appropriateness had evaporated. The only thing left in the room, the only thing with any weight, was the simple, hard currency of action, the value of what you do when no one is watching. Under the table, out of sight, I felt something. Julian's hand. He had reached for mine. It was not a tentative, questioning touch. His fingers found mine and closed around them. His hand was warm, and I noted with a strange sense of detachment, it was perfectly steady. The tremor he'd had all night, the fear, was gone. He had made his choice. I felt his thumb press once against my palm, a silent, desperate, and definitive signal. I let my fingers rest in his, but my focus remained on the table. This was over. The experiment was complete. The audit was finished. I reached for the one thing I had brought with me that was truly mine, my mother's silver pen. I picked it up. Its weight was familiar, comforting. It was a reminder of my own standard, the one I had lived by. Slowly, I placed the pen on top of the court order, the single sheet of paper that said, "Granted." I laid it diagonally across the text, a final signature, a seal, M. Dawes and Mara Whitfield, signing off on the same report. Then, I pulled my hand from Julian's. I placed both my palms on the table, and I stood up. The sound of my chair sliding back on the polished floor was the final gavel. Evelyn, Charles, and Julian all looked up at me, startled. The power of a person standing, while others are seated, is a physical, undeniable thing. Thank you. Charles, Evelyn, I said, my voice back to the cool, polite tone of a guest. It was an illuminating dinner. Thank you for having me in your home. I picked up my canvas tote bag. I didn't look at the half-eaten food, the gold-rimmed plates, or the shocked faces. I had ended the match. I didn't wait for Julian to follow me. I didn't look back to see if Evelyn had picked up her wine glass or if Charles was still staring at the court order. I walked out of the dining room, my footsteps silent on the thick maroon-colored rugs of the foyer. I let myself out the same massive, glossy black door I had entered through. It clicked shut behind me with the heavy, final sound of a bank vault. The night air hit me instantly. It was a shock, a physical slap of reality after the pressurized, artificial stillness of the house. The wind was high, cutting down the long, wide street of Commonwealth Avenue. It whipped the ends of my hair across my face and tasted of the cold, metallic brine of the nearby ocean. The lamps lining the street weren't the soft, curated gold of the Pierce's driveway. They were the harsh, industrial orange of sodium vapor, casting everything in a sick, jaundiced light. I pulled my simple canvas tote bag onto my shoulder, its strap familiar and solid. I walked down the long stone pathway, my worn flats making a quiet, slapping sound on the pavement. I reached the iron gates, which were, of course, closed. A small, secondary pedestrian gate stood beside them. I found the latch and let myself out onto the public sidewalk, a free citizen again. I stood there for a moment, just breathing. The wind was relentless. I thought I would feel triumphant. I thought I would feel angry. I thought I would feel some big, cinematic rush of vindication. I did not. I just felt empty and incredibly, profoundly clear. The adrenaline of the confrontation was fading, leaving behind the cold, sharp lines of what had actually happened. I had been prepared for their judgment. I had not been prepared for Julian's silence. That was the thought that stuck. Evelyn's snobbery was a known quantity, a variable I had already factored into the equation. Her insults were as predictable as a balance sheet. Charles's condescension was just the other side of the same coin, the velvet glove of the patriarchy. But Julian, his silence. I thought about the word I had used. Complicity. It was the right word. It was the perfect, forensic word. It was the silence of the good people, the polite people, who stand by and watch because making a scene is considered a greater sin than the injustice itself. Silence is the wall the privileged build around themselves, a soundproof room where they can remain comfortable, unchanged, and appropriate, while the real messy work of the world happens outside. His silence was the anesthetic that allowed his family's casual cruelty to function. I pulled my phone from my pocket. It felt cold in my hand. I had a long walk ahead of me to find a main street where I could hail a cab or call a ride. I started walking, my footsteps echoing in the canyon of manicured lawns and brick fortresses. I remembered something my mother used to say, standing in our small Wyoming kitchen, her hands always busy, always covered in flour or library paste. I'd be upset about some high school slight, some girl who'd made fun of my clothes, and my mother would stop and look at me with those clear, steady eyes and say, "Mara, honey, you listen to me. You never, ever bargain with your dignity. You don't rent it out, and you don't sell it, and you sure as hell don't let anyone else set the price." I had walked into that house tonight, and Evelyn Pierce had tried to set my price at $600 a month. I stopped under one of the orange streetlights. The wind was so loud it was almost a scream. I looked at my phone. The notification was still there, the one that had started the avalanche. Case update. Pierce Harbor Resorts, North Coast Holdings, order granted. I tapped it. It wasn't a new update. I realized it was the final update. The case was being moved from active settlement to closed. The last procedural checkbox had been ticked. It was the final digital bell tolling. The ghost, M. Dawes, was officially, finally, off the clock. The work was done. The circle was closed. I smiled, a small, cold smile that nobody could see. The universe, it seemed, had a flair for dramatic timing. I opened the Notes app on my phone. My fingers were cold, but they moved quickly. I typed a new heading, Her Worth Clinics. It was an idea that had been brewing for months, a vague, unformed thing in the back of my mind. Tonight had given it shape. Tonight had made it necessary. I typed, Her Worth Clinics. Not a charity, a service. Workshops for small business owners, women, immigrants, people from Somerville, people from Wyoming. Topic 1. How to read a contract. How to find the kill switch. How to spot a projection versus a material fact. Topic 2. What is bad faith? How to document it. Topic 3. The power of a small firm. How to be the ghost in the machine. I was going to take the weapons of the privileged, the complicated language they use to build their walls and protect their assets, and I was going to hand them out. I was going to teach people how to build their own foundations, so no one could ever try to buy them with a $600 allowance. I saved the note. I started walking again, faster now, a purpose. I turned a corner, leaving the manicured stillness of Commonwealth Avenue for the messier, more alive streets of Brookline. I was closer to closer to the real city. I passed a manhole cover in the street. The cold night air was hitting the hot steam tunnels below, and a thick, white plume of vapor was rising from the metal plate. It billowed up into the orange streetlight, thick and sulphurous, like smoke. It looked like the aftermath of a battle, the steam rising from a battlefield after the guns had gone quiet. I had walked out of a battle, and I had won. But it didn't feel like a victory, because winning implies the other side mattered. Evelyn's approval, Charles's respect, their standard. I had, for a moment, wanted them to see me. I had wanted to shatter their metrics, but standing here, in the cold, anonymous wind. I knew the truth. I didn't need their validation to be whole. I didn't need their permission to be valuable. My value was not in their house. It was in my head. It was in my work. It was in the new note on my phone. The victory wasn't in revealing who I was. The victory was in the fact that I had done the work in the first place, when no one was watching. The best victories, I realized, are the quiet ones, the ones that happen at 2 o'clock in the morning, alone in an office, when you find the single, misplaced comma that saves a company. You don't need to put that on a gala program. You just need to know you did it. And then, there was Julian. I had to make a decision about Julian, the man who had sat beside me, who had held my hand on the fire escape, who had talked about jazz and assistive technology. The man I was, I had to admit, falling for. He had failed. Tonight, he had failed me, and he had failed himself. He had chosen the gentle complicity of silence. But I also knew the weight of a family like that. I knew the gravitational pull of a lifetime of "don't embarrass us." I had been trained to fight. He had been trained to comply. If we were going to continue, this wall of silence, this NDA, this entire world of DAWs had to be taken down. Not just the part about his family, but all of it. He had to see all of me. The girl from Wyoming, the forensic accountant, the ghost, and he had to choose, in the cold light of day, if he was brave enough to stand next to her. Our relationship, if it was to have one, could only have one barrier between us: complete, brutal, and total honesty. I wouldn't bargain with my dignity, and I wouldn't bargain with my truth. I was thinking this, a hard, clear resolution, when something silent and dark swept over the street. I looked up, startled, a shadow. It cut across the orange light, and for a second, I saw it clearly, a great horned owl. Here, in the city, it was huge, hunting, its flight path a straight, merciless line as it disappeared between two apartment buildings. It was a strange, sudden, and beautiful piece of wildness in the middle of all this curated brick, a small signature from a world that didn't care about price tags. I smiled, for real this time, a small, genuine smile, just for myself. My phone vibrated in my hand. It was not a court update, it was a text message. From Julian. I stopped walking. I read the text on the glowing screen. It was one sentence. "I need to talk to you, tomorrow morning." The old Mara, the one from 6 hours ago, might have felt a rush of anxiety. She might have wanted to text back, to ask, "Are you okay?" or "What's wrong?" The Mara standing on the street corner, the one who had just walked out of that battle, was done with ambiguity. I held my thumb over the screen. I knew exactly what needed to happen. He had asked to talk. I would set the terms. Not his house, not mine. Neutral ground, public, in the daylight. I typed my reply. It was 4 words. Public garden, 8 on 12. I hit send. Then I put my phone back in my pocket, found the green T sign of the train station, and descended into the ground to go home. I was at the public garden by 7:45. The city was just waking up, and the air was thick with a cool, damp mist that softened all the edges. It clung to the bare branches of the willows and made the lagoon look like a sheet of smoked glass. The famous swan boats were gone, put away for the season, but the real ducks and a few hardy swans were gliding through the water, leaving silent, V-shaped wakes in the mist. It was quiet. It was the perfect, neutral ground. I stood near the foot of the small white suspension bridge. Not on it. I just watched the water. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't angry. I was just waiting. I had presented my findings. The other party had received the report. Now, we were here to discuss terms. He arrived at 8 o'clock. Exactly. I heard his footsteps on the gravel path before I saw him. He was not the same man from the dinner party. His blazer and crisp shirt were gone. He was wearing a simple dark sweater and jeans. His hair was uncombed, and his face was pale. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept at all, but his eyes, when they met mine, were not filled with the panicked embarrassment of the night before. They were clear, and they were terrified. He stopped a few feet away from me. He didn't try to touch me, didn't try to smile. "Hi," he said. His voice was rough. "Hi, Julian." He looked down at his shoes, then back up at me, forcing himself to hold my gaze. I don't even know where to begin." "You said you needed to talk," I said, my voice calm. "So talk." He took a deep breath, and the words came out in a rush, not an apology, but a report. I went back in after you left. My father had the paper, the court order, in his hand. He was just staring at it. My mother was at the table, just frozen. The main course came out. No one touched it. He scrubbed a hand over his face. I'm not sure what I expected. Shouting, maybe, but they were just silent, broken. I've never seen them like that. My father, all he kept saying, over and over, was, "She was right. The projections. My God. She was right." He wasn't talking to my mother. I think he was just talking to the room. He paused, and this part seemed harder to say. My mother, she didn't speak for a very long time. We just sat there, in that ridiculous, perfect room, in total silence for maybe an hour. The food got cold, and then she looked at me, not at my father, but at me, and she said, "I have spent my entire life teaching my son how to be admirable. I never, not once, taught him how to be trustworthy." The words hit me. That was a level of self-awareness I had not anticipated from Evelyn Pierce. It was brutal, and it was precise. Julian's eyes were burning. "She's right. Mara, she's right. My whole life has been a performance. Be the smart son. Be the successful engineer. Be the admirable Pierce. And last night, when it mattered, when you mattered, I was just an actor. I was admirable. I was quiet. I was well-dressed, but I wasn't trustworthy. I sat right there, and I let her. I let them treat you like that, because I was a coward. I was so terrified of disappointing her, so terrified of breaking the 'don't embarrass the family' rule, that I just sat there, in silence." He finally ran out of breath. He had delivered his confession. He had named his flaw. He was, in his own way, a forensic accountant, and he had just located the central point of his own moral bankruptcy. I let his words settle into the mist. I thought about what he'd said. Admirable versus trustworthy. It was a perfect summary. "Gentleness is different from silence. Julian," I said, my voice quiet, but it cut through the damp air. He looked at me, his brow furrowed. "What?" I said, "Gentleness is different from silence," I repeated. "You've always been a gentle person. That's what I liked. But last night, that wasn't gentleness. Gentleness heals. Gentleness is a choice to be kind. What you were last night was just quiet. And silence isn't gentle. Silence conceals. It's the wall you were hiding behind. It was, as I said, complicity." "I know," he whispered. "I know. And I can't be that person anymore. Mara, I won't be." He took a step closer. "I'm not going to stand here and just apologize. I know. I've seen you. I know that words aren't enough for you. You deal in proof. You deal in action." I watched him. This was the moment. "I am done," he said, and his voice was harder now, steadier. "I am done playing the perfect, admirable son. I am going to set boundaries with my family, not to attack them, but to be my own person, to be trustworthy. And I'm going to start by telling you and them the truth. My life with you, if I'm lucky enough to still have one, will not be a part of the Pierce family brand. It will be ours, and it will be honest." This was the new contract. He was offering a new set of terms. "No more rosy promises, Julian," I said. "I'm not interested in them. I'm not a rosy promises kind of girl." "I know," he said, a faint smile. "The first one touching his lips. You're a court order kind of girl, so action, only action. I get it. We stood there for a moment, the new terms of our agreement hanging in the air. There's something we need to agree on, I said, my voice serious. What I did, Dawes, the Pierce Harbor case. His face tensed up again. Mara, my God, I can't believe. You saved them. You saved us. And we. Stop, I said, holding up a hand. That's not what this is. First, the NDA is real. I will never, ever talk about that. And neither can you. It's not a story. It's not a weapon. It is not, under any circumstances, to become a piece of public relations. It's not a gotcha story for you to tell your parents, or a look who my girlfriend is story to tell your friends. It is a sealed case. Do you understand that? He nodded instantly. Completely. It never happened. Dawes is a ghost. Good, I said. And the second part? The Herworth clinics. The what? Last night, I said. After I left, I had an idea. I'm going to start a series of workshops. I'm going to teach people, regular people, small business owners, people who don't have Pierce in their name, how to read their own contracts, how to find the predatory clauses, how to protect themselves. I'm going to teach them how to do what I did. His eyes lit up, not with surprise, but with recognition. Of course you are, he said. That's the most Mara Whitfield thing I've ever heard. It's brilliant. It's necessary, I said. And that's my action. That's what I'm doing. It's my work. He stepped closer, and this time, he was hesitant, but determined. Okay, he said. Action. I'm a robotics engineer. I'm a logistics guy. I build systems. How can I help? Not with money, he added quickly, seeing my expression. I know, not with money, but you'll need a website. You'll need a registration system. You'll need to book venues. That's logistics. I can do that. I can build that. No name, no photos, no Pierce logo anywhere. Just an engineer, a volunteer. He was offering his skill, not his wallet. He was offering his time. He was offering, in the only way he knew how, to be trustworthy. A long, slow breath I didn't even know I was holding left my body. The tension of the last 24 hours, the cold, hard knot in my chest. It just eased. A comfortable silence fell between us. The first one, maybe ever. It wasn't the silence of concealment. It was the silence of agreement. Okay, engineer, I said, and I heard the smile in my own voice. We can talk about the logistics. He smiled back, a real smile, a smile that reached his tired, clear eyes. I'd like that. We started to walk, aimlessly, just following the gravel path around the lagoon. We walked past the ducks, past the make way for duckling statues. We came to the small, white, arched bridge, the one I had been waiting at. We walked up its gentle slope, stopping at the very top, looking down at the gray, misty water. The bridge, reflected in the lagoon, made a perfect, complete circle, an image of crossing over. We stood there for a minute, side by side, just looking at the reflection. Then, Julian slowly, deliberately, reached for my hand. I met him halfway, his fingers, warm and real, laced with mine. It wasn't the desperate, under-the-table grip from last night. It was firm. It was steady. It felt like two signatures at the bottom of a new and much, much better contract. We were going to be okay, or at least, we were going to be honest. And for me, that was the same thing. We stood there for a long time, in the quiet, healing mist, just holding hands. And then, my phone, in my pocket, vibrated. I let go of his hand, a small, apologetic look. Sorry, probably work. I pulled it out. It was not work. It was a text message, from a number I did not recognize, but the name was attached, Evelyn Pierce. My blood went cold, all over again. Julian, seeing my face, tensed. What? What is it? Is it from her? I didn't answer. I just read the text message on the screen. It was short, it was polite, and it was, in its own way, more terrifying than the dinner invitation. Mara, this is Evelyn. I hope you are well. I would like to come to your apartment. Today, I want to see how you live, if I may. I replied to Evelyn's text with my address. Nothing else. She wrote back. 6 p.m., if that is acceptable. I told her it was. My apartment, when I returned from the public garden, felt like the only real place on earth. My small, cluttered living room, my second-hand armchair, my shelves overflowing with books on economic theory. I had an hour. I didn't clean. Not really. I just made tea. I put out 3 mugs, just in case. I lit a single, unscented candle and placed it on my small, scarred, wooden dining table. There was no tablecloth. There were no gold chargers. The truth didn't need a backdrop. This was the second dinner, the real one. She arrived at 6 o'clock. Exactly. I buzzed her in, and I heard her footsteps on the 3 flights of stairs. They were slow, measured, not the confident click of her heels in the Chestnut Hill foyer, but the hesitant steps of a person in unknown territory. When I opened the door, I saw a woman I barely recognized. The silver-blonde helmet of hair was gone, pulled back into a simple, severe bun. She was wearing a pair of dark trousers and a simple, neutral-colored cashmere sweater. No jewelry, not even the diamond. She looked smaller, older, and she was completely alone. In her hand, she held a single, plain white, unaddressed envelope. She didn't try to smile. She just looked at me. Her eyes, those pale, assessing blue eyes, taking in my simple apartment, the worn rug, the wall of books, the smell of brewing tea. You are a very difficult person to categorize. Mara Whitfield, she said, her voice quiet. I'm not a category, Evelyn, I said. Neither are you. Please, come in. I stepped aside. She entered my home, and it felt like a truce, a parley on neutral ground. She stood for a moment, just observing. Her gaze was not judgmental, as it had been last night. It was forensic. She was finally, truly, seeing me. I have spent my entire life, she said, turning to me, her hands clasped around the white envelope, creating and managing and curating files on other people, their schools, their families, their appropriateness. I thought that was power. Then, last night, you created a file on me, and it was the only one that ever mattered. I don't keep files, Evelyn, I said, walking to my small kitchen. I just read the ones that are already there. Would you like some tea? She nodded, a small, almost bird-like movement. Yes, please. I motioned to my table. Have a seat. She sat down at the scarred wooden table. I brought over 2 mugs, one for her, one for me, and the simple brown teapot. I poured. The only sound was the liquid hitting the ceramic. We sat in silence for a moment, not the cold, pressurized silence of her dining room, but a real, awkward, human silence. She was listening. I was listening. She finally pushed the white envelope across the table. It slid over the wood and stopped in front of me. What is this? I asked. It is my attempt, she said. Julian told me this morning about your clinic, the Herworth Project. I looked at her, my guard instantly back up. It's not for you to buy, Evelyn, I said, my voice sharp. I know, she said, and her voice was firm. Open it. I picked up the envelope. Inside was a single, folded piece of paper. It was a check, a cashier's check, from a bank I didn't recognize, which meant she had gone to some effort. The amount written on it was large, very large. It was more than my annual salary. It was enough to fund the clinics for a full year. But I was looking at the signature line. It was blank. It's not signed, I said, confused. No, she said, and it is not from me. It is from a holding company. registered in Delaware, that has no legal connection to the Pierce family. It is an anonymous donation. There will be no press release. There will be no Pierce Atelier logo on your website. No one will ever know where it came from. I had my lawyer set it up this afternoon. I stared at the check, and then at her. This was not a bribe. This was logistics. This was her, in her own strange, transactional way, using her power to support my work, not co-opted. "Why?" I asked, my voice flat. "Because," she said, "you are right. I have been unwell in my thinking, but I'm still a very practical woman, and I know a good investment when I see one." I put the check down. This was the first twist. Evelyn took a sip of her tea. Her hands were still. "Today." "That," she said, "is the easy part. This is the hard part." She reached into the pocket of her trousers and pulled out a small, folded piece of notepaper. It was thick, creamy cardstock, the same kind her thank you note had been written on. It was a handwritten note. "Last night," she said, her voice dropping, "before you arrived, I was prepared. I was prepared for the girl I expected to meet. The girl in the simple dress, with the scuffed shoes, and the paper bag." She unfolded the note. "I had this ready. It's a script. It's a civil breakup offer, a list of polite, gentle, but firm reasons why your relationship with Julian was untenable for the family. I was planning to give it to him, to read, after you left. I had an offer prepared, a financial one, to make the separation clean." She was confessing. She was telling me, in this small, quiet apartment, that she had come to dinner last night not to meet me, but to fire me. She looked at the note in her hand. I did not get to use it. She looked up at me, her blue eyes clear and absolutely devoid of artifice. I am so very ashamed of this, and I am sorry." She didn't use the note to apologize. She just offered the confession, raw and humiliating, as its own form of apology. I just nodded. I didn't absolve her. I just accepted the data. "And," she said, taking a shaky breath, "there is a third thing." She was on a roll. She reached for her bag, which I hadn't even seen. On the floor, she pulled out a thin, bound document. It was sleek, professional. The logo on the front said the Pierce Atelier. "This is not a check," she said, "and it is not a confession. This is a file." She slid it across the table. I opened it. It was an internal review document. It was their selection process for their high-profile volunteer program, and it was exactly what I expected. It was a checklist. Education, Tier 1 schools preferred. Social media footprint, photogenic quality required. Family connections. It was, in black and white, her entire failed metric system. "It's biased," she said, stating the obvious. It's an embarrassment. It's the architecture of my own prejudice." I looked up at her, waiting. I would like to hire you, Ms. Whitfield," she said, her voice formal. "As a consultant, not M. Dawes," she added, quickly. "As Mara, I want you to look at this. I want you to help me fix it. I want you to help me tear down this bias. I will pay your full professional rate." This was the final twist. She was asking for my help. She was handing me the keys to her kingdom, and a wrench, and asking me to start dismantling the engine. I looked at the report. I looked at the unsigned check. I looked at the ungiven breakup note. This was a woman who had seen her entire world burn to the ground, and she was, in her own way, trying to figure out how to rebuild, but with better materials. Before I could answer, there was a knock at my door. Not a buzz, a knock. Julian, he was late. I opened the door, and he was there, breathless, his cheeks red from the cold, and from running up the 3 flights of stairs. "I'm sorry," he panted. Am I late? Mom, you're here." "I am, Julian," Evelyn said from the table. "Sit, have tea." Julian looked at me, his eyes asking 1,000 questions. I just nodded. He came in, shed his jacket, and sat at the small table, making it feel suddenly, absurdly, small. I brought something, Julian said, his voice still catching his breath. He was looking at his mother. After you went to bed, Mom, I went into your study. I was angry. I was looking for, I don't know what, and I found this. He reached into his pocket. It wasn't an envelope. It wasn't a court order. It was a small, rectangular piece of laminated cardstock, faded and worn at the edges. It was an old library card from the Laramie County Public Library System in Wyoming. He placed it on the table. Evelyn stared at it. "Where?" she whispered. "Did you find that?" "In your old memory box," Julian said, his voice soft. "The one you keep on the bottom shelf. The name on it is Evelyn Dawes." My head snapped up. Dawes, my mother's maiden name, the name I had used. It was just a coincidence, a stupid, bizarre, universal coincidence. Evelyn's hand, the steady one, reached for the card. "I was 19, she whispered. "I was a scholarship student at the University of Wyoming. I had forgotten this. She was a girl from a small town. She was a scholarship student. She was me. She was a girl who had made it, and then spent the next 40 years building a fortress to forget where she had come from." I looked at Evelyn Dawes, the girl from Wyoming, and I looked at Evelyn Pierce, the matriarch from Chestnut Hill. "We don't need to change our names, Evelyn, to fix ourselves," I said, my voice very soft. "We just need to change our habits." Evelyn looked up from the library card. Her eyes were wet. She didn't cry, but they were wet. She nodded. Once, a slow, deep acknowledgement. "I am going to start," she said, her voice thick. "At the hardest place, the family dinner. The Pierce family rules are under new management." She looked at Julian, and then at me. "Next time, the criteria list for appropriate will only have 2 lines. Be kind and be honest." She pushed herself up from the table. She looked down at the documents, the map of her unconditional surrender, the check, the confession, the plea for help, and my pen, my mother's silver pen, which I had been using to take notes on her biased report. She reached out and picked up the pen. She read the engraving on the side, her voice a whisper. "Do right, fear nothing." She looked at me, and it was the first time I felt she was truly seeing me. Mara Whitfield, from Laramie, Wyoming, the girl with the scuffed shoes and the silver pen. She placed the pen down, in the very center of the table, between us all. "That night," she said, her voice clear, "at my house, you re-signed the Pierce family rules. You just used your own ink." I let those words sit. And then, as if the universe was a novelist who loved a tidy ending, my phone, on the counter, buzzed. I picked it up, an email, from the court. The case was closed. The final settlement I had negotiated for Pierce Harbor Resorts, the one that ensured its stability and the fairness of its terms, had been officially, finally, and irrevocably granted. I looked at the email. I looked at the check. I looked at the library card. I looked at Julian, who was watching me with a new, steady trust. And I looked at Evelyn, who was watching me with respect. I had nothing left to prove. I had nothing left to hide. I turned the phone screen off. I put it in my pocket. Dawes was gone. Mara Whitfield was here. And there was so much left to do. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from right now? Let's connect. Drop a comment below. Share your thoughts. And be sure to subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories. Please like this video, and if you can, support us by hitting the hype button. It makes a huge difference and helps this story get heard by so many more people.